Welcome to the Mojo Podcast, a place for curious minds to fill up on insight and inspiration to apply to your life so you can keep your mojo flying and not falling. I'm your host, Richard Stokes, and it's my pleasure to be here with you for episode 8 of the 5th series of the Mojo Podcast. And in this current series, I'm talking to a group of people I call the practitioners, experts in their field who have truly walked the walk before talking the talk, and whose wisdom, advice and tips will help you, perhaps to get a little unstuck, to move forward again in the direction you choose, to find flow over resistance, in short, to find your mojo. This week we land on a subject which is likely to affect all of us at some point to some degree. We're talking about stress, and specifically the stress that can come from working your way to the top of your game or profession, and then the ongoing battle it can seem to stay there. Our conversation today centres around my old industry, advertising and media, a dynamic, fast-paced and intense business, which I found mostly fun and enjoyable. But looking back, I know I was in a stressed state for more time than is probably healthy. You may have seen the brilliant dramatisation of 1960s era advertising set in New York with Don Draper as a charismatic, chauvinistic, brilliant and flawed lead character. Well, today we dip into the other reason Mad Men gets its title. Here's my guest today describing a road rage incident which dramatically pointed a finger at just how stressed he was and thankfully served as the catalyst for him to recognise it was time to change.
And he got out of the car, and I was out of the car almost before he was. I was in such a rage. And he was a big guy, and I walked up to him, and I started screaming in his face. And he started by saying, you know, I'm going to kill you, blah, 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 what did you do? And bear in mind, he was in the right. And I just went, nose to nose and said, no, you're not, what are you going to do? Screaming in his face. And he obviously looked at me quite understandably and said, you're a madman. So I got back in the car, and I got about 100 yards down the road, pulled over and just started shaking because I thought, I've got 2 young kids, I've got a great family, I've got my life ahead of me. What the hell am I doing?
Today I'm joined by Peter Magnani. Peter was my very first boss in advertising, and I have to say, with all honesty, he helped guide me and mentor me for those key early years of anyone's career. We then worked in different and competitive agencies, always in touch but not close enough for me to know what he was experiencing. Very candidly, Peter shares his mojo story today, one of great success and peak moments, and of the grind and sacrifice which characterise many careers. You'll hear that when he should have been celebrating his greatest business triumph, he was actually in the midst of a profound stress-induced episode. Eventually, Peter wakes up, post that road rage moment, and he decided to make change, big change over time, to better understand his stress, to unpick it, and he created a way to come back to himself and find his mojo. He's now taken this breakthrough and created his own business to help others going through anything similar. And there are many of us in that place. His app is called Beam, and Peter talks to why so many people are finding the app helpful for spotting patterns and links in their lives which can lie at the heart of their stress. This is a great conversation, of course helped by the fact that Peter and I have known each other for around 25 years, but there is no jargon and there is no hiding in here. Peter is all in, and I salute him for that. Just before we jump into the conversation, I wanted to take this opportunity to say that if you're going through anything similar to Peter, stress, anxiety, deep imposter syndrome, often a good first place is to share what you're going through. Of course, a loved one, but maybe there's a mental health first aider at work, a trusted colleague, perhaps seeking out a therapist or a qualified coach can help bring a new awareness to what is going on for you and to make plans to move forward again. Okay, here's my mojo conversation with Peter Magnani. So welcome back to the Mojo Podcast, and I'm really happy, delighted to have my guest today, Peter Magnani, join me from West London. Peter, how are you doing today?
Very good, thank you, and thanks very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And as I said in the intro, Peter, our history goes a long way back, actually. I mean, a long way back. My very first job in the advertising world, and you were my boss.
I was, and I hope you don't go into too much detail about all that, because obviously there's a lot of embarrassing stories, I think, for both of us. But no, it'd be quite fun to relive some old times, I think.
Yeah, and it was, sort of the mid '90s, a very different time. But I think we're going to touch on a bit of that in terms of how the world of work was then and your journey through it as we touch on your story. But Peter, we always start here. I want to get a sense of where your mojo is today out of 10. How are you scoring today?
I am scoring, I reckon, about an 8. It was 9 until I couldn't find a soundproof room in my house. So it's gone down a bit due to that stress, but it's definitely 8.
We just moved you out of your echoey bathroom into a different room, didn't we, to get...
You did.
Okay, so it's hovering at an 8, just down from a 9, but that sounds pretty good. But when I say that word, mojo, that I ask everybody about, what for you comes up when you think about that word, mojo?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think of strength. I think of being prepared, being in control, and feeling strong, both physically and emotionally. So I'm quite clear on that. It's a very sort of practical definition in my world.
Yeah. So this sense of strength, say physically and mentally, and feeling ready, prepared for what's coming, whether that be a podcast interview or the day ahead. And then obviously, in your sort of, let's say your previous life as a very senior operator in the advertising world. We're gonna get into essentially stress is what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So have you seen your mojo fluctuate drastically over the years in the sense of strength and what it means to you?
Completely. I think there's 2 aspects to that. The first is that, as you said, when we were working and when we were in the thick of things, I would probably have called my mojo about being strong, but very much strong in a sort of, let me project this to the world. If I talk strong, if I project strength, then I am strong. Whereas now it's completely different. It's, in a sense, of course, we've all got egos. We all care what people think of us, but it's very much about thinking about my internal strength and the practical things I need to do to maintain that and improve it.
So that sense of mojo for you being around strength, the whole meaning of it sounds like it's gone through a 180 flip in the last few years.
I've only had the experience of working in the advertising and media business. That was my career. But I suspect a lot of businesses and the people I talk to, it's all very much the same. I think you tend to fall into the trap of, well, our business is different, but it's just a group of people trying to achieve a task. Everyone's ambitious. Everyone's got their personal challenges and their work challenges. And I kind of look back on that time now, and I wish that I'd sort of had the perspective and had the experiences I've had now, because the truth is, in quite fundamental ways, I'd have probably thought about things differently and acted differently. But yeah, I mean, now, I think we'll come on to talk about the steps I've taken and what I'm doing now. But you have to, my experience is you have to work at these things. I think in the past, I thought, okay, I want to feel stronger. I want to be more resilient. So I was very dramatic about it. I go, well, what I need to do is now I need to go on this crazy diet for the next month, and that will solve a problem. Or ridiculous things like I'm being a bit of an arsehole at home or at work. You can testify to that. And I'm going to be really nice for the next month and see what happens. I mean, just really naive things. Whereas, now it's this constant small step working at it. And I don't get so upset and really sort of discombobulated by things going wrong or not meeting that target, that ambition. I recover much quicker. Right.
So yeah, we're gonna get on your personal journey of development and creating that perspective that you say was probably missing from the early days. But to paint a picture, Peter, tell us a bit about, as I said, you're a very senior operator in the advertising and media world. Can you give us a sense, maybe with an example or a story thrown in, just about how much stress maybe was in your life? Because it's coming out of that. It's your response to that brought us to this conversation, really.
Yeah, I can. And one springs to mind immediately was probably where I was. A career is, it builds, doesn't it? And it gets to a sort of tipping point's the wrong word, but it gets to a sort of point where you've reached a level of seniority and responsibility. And advertising, as you know, is all about pitches and winning. You've got to be the star who's had the next win,
right?
And aren't I wonderful? And we won a piece of business. I won't name which it is. We travelled to the international market. We got appointed. It was probably the best moment of my career.
Oh right, okay, right. So this is a peak moment then in your
this
time.
Is a peak moment because I'd been instrumental in a lot of it. Obviously, it was a massive team, but I'd taken lots of decisions. I'd been given that responsibility.
Yeah,
and we flew back that night, and it was just before Christmas, and I ended up having an argument with my wife about a Christmas tree. Obviously, I'd been pretty absent working on this pitch. We were putting up the Christmas tree. I was completely knackered, and I can't remember the exact aspects of it, but we got in this big argument about a Christmas tree, and I completely overreacted. And I then suddenly started losing my memory, which I now know is a really relatively common stress-related symptom.
Right.
But it was the most terrifying experience I'd ever had, in that I was sitting in our front room and I was crying because I was going, I couldn't remember my kids' names.
Oh.
I was constantly in my mind going, okay, what did I just say? What did I just say then? So I went to A&E and explained the situation, and the doctor was like, yeah, well, I'm kind of not surprised because you've been doing this, you've been traveling here, you've been doing this. He said, I guarantee you by the end of tomorrow, it'll all be fine. So I went home, went to bed. But that night was terrifying because I didn't know, you kind of have these senses that something terrible is going to happen, and I couldn't remember anything. So anyway, the next day, I started getting my memory back. I started feeling better. And then, of course, we did the tests, what had happened. And it was just acute stress and my inability to manage it. But it was such an extreme reaction. And it was ironic that, in theory, my best moment was, I can honestly tell you, the worst moment of my life, because I actually thought, I didn't know it was this stress-related thing. I thought, oh my God, my brain's malfunctioning. I've got 2 young kids. I've got my lovely wife, and life is over. That sounds very dramatic, but it's absolutely true. And that probably, in retrospect, is one of those key moments in a journey that eventually got me here.
Thank you for sharing that so candidly, that sense of here you are at this, what should have been the absolute peak of a glittering career, as you say, all the decisions you've made, the team you brought together, the hard work you've put in, and instead of being in a position to celebrate it, you actually, you've triggered such a stress response to everything that's probably, I'm guessing these are things that are built up not just through that
my whole life,
that pitch, right? Exactly. And how many years of work at that sort of intensity had you put into that point?
Well, that's a great question. That level of intensity, probably about 10, but the previous 10, when I worked with you, I wasn't working that intensely because we had a lot of fun.
That's a different story, yeah.
That's a different story. But I would say probably about a 10-year grind of that.
Yeah.
And as we speak, so I know you're asking the questions, but just an observation. this is like therapy as well. And I didn't tell anyone. The last thing I did going back to work was tell anyone about that, because it just I would have thought that would have meant weakness. And I'm so glad that the working environment now means that A, it probably wouldn't have got to that. And B, people, I would hope, talk about that more candidly and look for help.
And again, for perspective, how long ago was that incident?
That was probably about a decade ago now.
So about 10, okay, so 10 years ago. And yeah, things we would hope have shifted considerably in that time. But I still think, and I think it's a very male thing from just the people I talk to and work with, the tendency to hold it in.
Oh yeah.
Still sits there, and you only look at the numbers in terms of male suicide rates, and it is men not being able to share and express vulnerability. I'm not feeling the way I think I should. I don't know what's going on. I can't control this. But I think hopefully now there are simply more outlets that, as you say, either weren't available to you, or you would have, even if they'd been there maybe at the time, you'd have pushed back on and said, no, not for me.
You're absolutely right.
So there you are. You have that moment of absolute intensity in both ways. What was your response to that, Peter? What happened after that?
Well, initially nothing. My initial response was, "Oh, I got away with that, and now back to the grind." Then, I mean, obviously before that, things had been building up, from early teens, this general sense of frustration, uncertainty, manifesting itself in anger sometimes, catastrophizing about everything. I mean, but of course you keep it in and you go to another day. So that had been the build up. Then this happened. Then I was in a situation probably a couple of years later, bearing in mind I'd ignored this incident. I'd put that in a box, and I was driving to work and a bit late and, trying to beat the traffic. And I can't remember the exact incident, but there was a turning and I was completely in the wrong. And there was a guy in a van. And as I drove past him making this illegal maneuver, he just raised his arms and said, as if to say, "What are you doing, you madman?" And I started giving him the V sign, this completely inappropriate, aggressive response to, by someone who was completely in the wrong, and drove on. And then I thought, oh, well, what an arsehole. And then the van swung around behind me and drove past me and cut me off. Oh. And the guy, and I'm not a fighter. My wife would tell you I'm not a lover either, but I'm neither. But and he got out of the car, and I was out of the car almost before he was. I was in such a rage.
Yeah. And
he was a big guy, and I walked up to him, and I started screaming in his face. And he started by saying, "I'm now going to kill you, blah, blah, blah. What did you do?" And bear in mind, he was in the right. And I just went, nose to nose and said, "No, you're not. What are you going to do?" Screaming in his face. And he obviously looked at me quite understandably and said, "You're a madman, and I'm going to go on my way." So I got back in the car, nice journey to work, illegal maneuvers, getting in a fight almost. And I got about 100 yards down the road, pulled over and just started shaking because I thought, I've got 2 young kids. I've got a great family. I've got my life ahead of me. What the hell am I doing? Not in a self-pitying way, but I felt sad. I thought, how have you got to this? You know what I mean? What is going on? This is ridiculous. I told my wife, I almost had to confess to my wife because it was such a ridiculous thing to do. And she'd been saying for years, you need to meditate. And I looked in the online and I found this company, London Meditation Centre, and signed up. And even when I was signing up, I was thinking, this isn't me. I mean, I remember thinking when I went for my first lesson, and I know we know the same company,
same teacher, Michael and Gillian,
which is a complete coincidence.
Yes,
they're fantastic. But as I was leaving to go for the first lesson, I remember saying to myself, right, if they want me to sort of sign over 10% of the rest of my life's income, like there was some cult or something. This is my ignorant view of meditation. That's what I thought. Anyway, I had that, and it was a profound experience, and I still practice Vedic meditation. It's one of those base blocks of my life, and actually that added a level of calm, clarity, and although I've just explained this kind of crazy man, facing down big guys, it added a level of assertiveness, but in the pure sense of the word, because a lot of the stress is you're making compromises. You you're not doing yourself justice. You're thinking, is that the right thing to do, or is that the expedient thing to do? So anyway, so it led to that, which was another step in the journey.
Yeah, and did you see? You said this calmness. Did that kick in quite quickly for you with your meditation experience?
The first lesson. There are 4 lessons, a couple of hours each.
Yeah.
The first lesson: go home and meditate tonight. I tried it once before, and I got such a level of calmness, comfort, even to the point where I could see colors clearer, which is, it was that profound.
Wow. Yeah. And that, as you said, that's something we both share. And it's not something I ever push people to meditation, unlike your wife in that instance, but it is a suggestion. Anyone who's curious about finding that foundational level of calm in their life, I would certainly talk about Vedic meditation. So after that, Pete, you're still obviously working. I'm assuming in this, as we both know, and a lot of people listening will know, it's a high stress, high pressure, results driven industry. However, you're now a meditator, and you're finding this level of calm. Was that then, okay, this is me now? I've got this foundation, and I'm good. I'm good to go. What happened next for you?
No, it wasn't. I'm good to go. It gave me the clarity to think, okay, now you need to deal with stuff. You can see there's been this build up, and I was exploring lots of things, whether it was from therapy to trying different apps on the market, or really the gamut. I was quite systematic about it,
right?
And a lot of them had their benefits, but they were quite siloed, and I wasn't feeling much better. I had this base block of sanity, let's call it, through meditation, but I was still struggling on lots of levels. And the way I managed to really make some big steps forward is probably the most basic thing you could do. It was my own dumb form of journaling, which was every day, half an hour at lunchtime, get a piece of paper and start sort of purging all these random thoughts in my head, like, one of my parents isn't well, or one of my kids is struggling at school, or am I going to get that bonus, or why am I eating a massive bar of whole nut every night at 11 o'clock? And, in another bubble, there's you're putting on a lot of weight. And I could immediately see patterns and links. And they were so obvious. That put things immediately in perspective. And of course, there was a lot on there that I still had no idea why I was feeling the way I was feeling. But that process of almost putting my life on a page, and it included emotions and stuff I was doing, I found incredibly cathartic and gave me a sense of control, and very much motivated me to think, okay, well, even those things I have no idea why I'm feeling that way or why I'm doing that. Let me go forward. I was motivated to try and solve some of those things or investigate them. So that was the next element, and that led on to where I am now.
But I'm just really interested about this moment of the decision to, I'm going to start writing this stuff down. This purging, and had that come from, again, you're suggesting that you're very curious and methodical about searching out different things. Some things worked, some things didn't quite stick. Where did that idea for the journaling come from? Did it just come to you?
I've never thought about that, but as you asked that question, it had always been with me. In times of stress, And many years before, a close member of my family was very ill. And I remember the way I dealt with that, and it was purely instinctive. I just used to write stuff down. I used to write down how I was feeling. So, as you asked me that question, it had always been a sort of go-to thing about writing stuff down, but that was more to put it in a box and ignore it. Whereas this was, in fact, it was the opposite. This was facing it directly, literally looking at it on a piece of paper. That was write it down. You sort of got it out and never look at it again. It was instinctive. It's funny, isn't it? It sounds very logical, but it was purely instinctive.
But in there, look at the choice you made there as well. To in past times of stress, I'll have written this down and put it away, never to be seen again. Here, I'm actively looking for patterns and links, and I'm discovering them, and I'm finding things that I maybe had a sense about but wasn't sure, and now I know. And was that then you sort of talked about this sort of sense of control? Was this, I mean, literally, was this bringing some mojo back for you? That sort of strength that you've talked about.
My mojo was immediately. Let's say it was at a 4 or a 5. Even before I'd got to any solutions, it was at a 7 and 8. My mojo was absolutely a 7 and 8 because I was confronting stuff and doing stuff to help myself. Sometimes tiny stuff, and sometimes just thinking about stuff, but I wasn't ignoring it.
Give us some examples of the tiny and some of the big in that.
Example of a big thing would be, I've always swum quite a lot because you probably remember.
We used to go swimming together.
We used to go swimming together. And that was a sort of nice to do, but I'd never actually realized how beneficial that was to my mental health. And so, of course, immediately I understood that, again, meditation is one foundation. Another foundation was fitness, which, of course, is obvious when you say it, but it was my personal discovery. And another big thing was I'd never identified, I had this weird pattern, which is go out, have too much to drink, feel hungover. It's not weird at all, actually. As I say this, it's pretty common, because we see it in patterns. Eat badly because you've lost motivation. What's the point of doing fitness today because I feel terrible? Feel worse. Don't go to fitness. You get in this downward spiral. And in terms of little things, not turning the alarm on and then waiting for 5 minutes before I get up, meditating immediately. Whilst I was meditating, I would sometimes leave the meditation till later in the day because I didn't want to get up early, doing that to start the day, being much more interested in other people genuinely rather than, that thing when you go, hi, how are you? How are you? How are you? As you're saying that, I would be sitting there going, can we just get to the point?
The small talk part of any business meeting.
But suddenly I was genuinely interested. Lots of different.
I'm just fascinated by this capturing that you're doing of all these different facets of your life, as you say, like with the fitness stuff. There's what happens when I go out and have too much to drink, and we know this industry historically lots of entertaining going on, so that would have been a factor. Through to just noticing how you are with people and your genuine curiosity for look, how are you doing today, and wanting to be different in that exchange.
And guess what? People were different with me. Because it's so obvious. You genuinely take an interest, and people take an interest in you.
So on that, tell me about people seeing what was going on with you when you're in this process now. Just before we get on to the creation of Beam, you're mapping this out. It's your mechanism, as I'm understanding it, for dealing with the stress of life, for building your mojo up. What were people seeing in you?
Well, starting with my family, and my extended family and my immediate family, they found big differences in terms of my general mood, levels of positivity, not catastrophizing stuff, ability to absorb challenges and work through them, and just frankly a nicer person to be around. I'm actually making myself sound like an ogre, by the way. That's the problem with all this honesty. But I mean, by the way, just to be clear, I was a fully functioning member of the human race. I wasn't this, complete ogre.
We got that. You got lovely family. You got a big job. You've always been a really nice guy, Peter.
Oh yeah, thanks.
But clearly there was something that you wanted to.
Oh yeah, But so they started to see the difference, and friends and colleagues, and I was just acting more differently, and it's that assertiveness, it's that confidence, it's I have the confidence to sort of be more of who I actually am, rather than this sort of facade with with colleagues or family. I remember with my kids, because I used to travel a lot, when I used to spend time with my kids, I used to think, right, we've got to do this. I've got to be a good dad, and I've got to take you here or do this. And I found that I sort of had the confidence to go, let's just go in the front room and, bundle around on the sofa and watch rubbish telly and sort of relax. And of course the kids love that more, because you're actually engaged in that, rather than let's go to the park, so I'll be on my emails while you're on the swings. Right.
And I know your kids are older than my son. What age are they now? Are they sort of teenagers?
They're teenagers, yeah.
Teenagers. And what I do know is that obviously our children are our greatest teachers. And I imagine they were the keenest observers probably of this change in Dad.
Yes.
Have they reflected back on that to you?
I think they were probably too young to have sort of intellectually recognised that, but I'd have to ask them. I'm always scared of asking my kids what they think of me, because they're generally offering disparaging comments on me. But maybe that's something I should do after this.
See what they've got to say. So let's switch it up a bit. And there was a point, a decision was made. I'm sensing, when you left corporate behind in this big job, and people who know you will know, and people who are not in the industry, you were at top of your game. You've had that peak moment, and obviously what happened after it. But when was the decision made that I need to, this thing that I've created by drawing it for me, I want to bring this to more people, and that means I need to make a change?
Well, it really came from other people saying, "What are you doing? You've changed quite fundamentally." And I would tell them, and you could see that as I was explaining that, half an hour at lunchtime, I write down all my thoughts. You could see in their eyes them going, "Well, I'm not that self-obsessed, and the last thing I'm going to do is spend half an hour a day mapping my thoughts and whatever." And but then, I remember one day I was at work, and I was looking at a screen full of consumer data, and data that was from people's searches, people's smartphone activity. And I was wearing an iWatch, and I had my phone there, and I suddenly thought, hold on, a lot of this data is giving off these signals, which currently I'm using, and we are as an organization, to identify ways of selling stuff to people, which is perfectly legitimate. It's part of the capitalist. I'm not one of these people who goes, "Oh, advertising, bad or negative." But I thought, well, that's one use for it, and we're all aware of the sort of big tech abuses of it as well. And I thought, what if we could find a way of combining the way you're feeling with these signals and indicators from what you're doing? And I started really a deep dive journey into that. And, you know, understanding that obviously our health is relatively well monitored in terms of working out steps, but then, you know, our money. There's a great saying, I can't remember, it's an American industrialist who said, don't tell me what your priorities are, show me where you spend your money and I'll tell you what your priorities are. And if you look at people's spending behavior, they're brilliant indicators of behavior. Screen time, you know, social media usage. And if you could combine those, and I hate the word holistic because it sounds very fancy, but if you could integrate those, you're starting to get a picture of people's emotional intelligence. You're starting to get a picture of levels of self-knowledge, and you're starting to get different areas. You can say, okay, well, might that be having an effect on that, or that having an effect on that? So yeah, so I did that sort of desktop research, and then I commissioned a piece of research into, you know, 1,000 people in the UK, because I thought if I'm going to spend my own money and you know, leave a good job, and let's be frank, I mean, at my age, the job was going to leave me anyway. Because but you know, you're thinking ahead. You're thinking ahead. So I sort of engineered that, and then I took the plunge, which interesting, I'd never thought about. I sort of stumbled on this solution, and then thought, let's make it a business.
Yeah, it's an amazing basis for a business where it's something actually you've created out of need for yourself. Other people have recognized the benefit, and then what I love is you went and did the research, because that's your training. You know, as a media guy, let me see what the consumer, does anyone going to want this? And I love the fact that you did that as well, and obviously got a positive result from that. But then the decision to, right, I'm going to, you know, okay, maybe, and there's just been a lot of noise this week about over 50s in the workplace not being valued and sort of being sort of pushed out. And I guess you had a sense of that coming your way, and the media industry is definitely a young person's game still, because it's just so demanding and dynamic. But you know, just as an aside, isn't it a shame that the wisdom of people who are a little bit older isn't necessarily valued? But then you decide, I'm going to put my own money into this, I'm going to create this and step out and have my, what is it you call it, your phase 3 career?
Yes, my email is phase 3. My first phase was working with you, and the second phase was the next 20 years. And this is phase 3. And it you know, you say you take the plunge. You do take the plunge, but it was almost like there was something inside me that had to do it. You know, I felt that I needed to test myself in a different way. And this might sound a bit holier than thou, but I was excited about, you know, helping people sort of use their data just for their good, you know?
Right.
You know, and I remember once my kids, when they were younger, said, what do you do, Daddy? Every kid asks their children. And I said, well, quite proudly, you know, I do this job where we plan, we understand consumer motivations, and then you know that advert you see on the side of the bus, or that advert you see on YouTube. You know, we work out, you know, why you might want to buy this product. And they both looked at me and they said, no, those ads are just annoying, and then carried on doing something else.
There you go. They just cut you as kids' observations. They just cut you.
Yeah, and I thought, okay, fair enough. But it was quite exciting to try and do something that would genuinely help people.
Yeah, and I love this sense of this compulsion. You had to do it, and I did a whole series actually talking to entrepreneurs, and that came out really clearly. This almost unexplainable, I just have to do this need, which I would just talk about. You found a level of your purpose in life, and that just drives one on very clearly through the whatever hard times probably lie ahead when you are setting up your own thing. How's it been creating and unleashing Beam?
Tough, exciting, expensive. It's funny. When I started this, everyone said it's going to take longer and be more expensive than you thought. And I thought, no. I know how to do this better than you. But of course it has. But overall, apart from my family, the greatest thing I've ever done. And we're still at a very early stage, and who knows what lies ahead. I'm under no illusions how tough it is to build a business. But yeah, it's fantastic.
And how can people? You've talked a little bit about, obviously, Beam is an app, and we'll get it on our phones. How can people best interact with it, Peter, and find out more right now?
Well, they can go to the website beamandme.com, and you've got direct links to the app stores and Google Play Store. So you can find out more information about it there. We're starting to ramp up our social media presence, because it's quite a complicated product. It's taken a long time to develop, because there's it's a smart app. There's machine learning that we've developed over the last couple of years. So we haven't really talked about it, but now we're going out to talk about it. And the great thing is people are talking about it organically. But the best way to do it is to go to the App Store, download it, and try it out.
Brilliant. So all those links will be in the show notes for anyone who's interested in finding these patterns and links in their life. And there's loads of amazing content on there. You might even find a couple of episodes of the Mojo podcast on there to listen to help you on your particular journey. And how do you sort of reflected on it a bit there, Peter, in terms of, like, apart from family, it's like the best thing I've ever done. What else sort of comes up for you when you think about this creation of yours?
Pride. Wanting to tell everyone about it all the time, because the people who are using it are benefiting from it and really feeding back positively. And the thing is, I use it. It's not some product you just put out there. It's like I use it, and everyone I know uses it. So you're constantly looking at it and going, well, that could be better, or let's change this or that. I mean, I put 7 days a week, 5 days a week. I wake up and my mojo is 10.
Wow.
What 1 day a week I wake up and I go, bit of a 7. And 1 day a week I go, am I the craziest person of all time? being totally frank with you, but the great thing is I then look at my app and I go, well, look at your Beam score, look at your levels of stress and resilience, look at your relationship score, look at how you're managing your money better. And that sort of is it's almost like a companion. It's almost like a companion where it immediately puts things in perspective.
Yeah, I got that sense, a little companion just to show you about perspective. Maybe if you want to think about Mojo, this is where my Mojo's at, because look at all these scores that are important to me and my Mojo. And just on that, Pete, what apart from obviously using Beam every day and meditation, what else are you finding that for you is a daily practice that's important for your Mojo? Because I'm finding a lot of people I talk to, there's something or some things that they do. And I guess that's for you, it's particularly relevant because they're probably mapped onto your Beam score as well. What else are you doing that's, I've got to do that to get that Mojo to the 10? I
do consciously think of the positive aspects of my life, which is something I never did before. And sorry to bring it back to Beam rather inelegantly, but of course you can see the positive effects on Beam that you're having, but it's got these 4-step pathways that are rooted in CBT and evidence-based pathways. They're very practical. So I'm constantly on one pathway or the other, because emotions change as you think. So it might be about my coffee intake, or it might be about more fundamental about managing my money. The thing that came up this morning was fast food delivery. We've been having as as a household, and general feelings of unhealthiness. So yeah, so those are the real foundations. In a way, Beam has become another foundation for me. But you said you'd have to do it every day. We've been very pragmatic about it. People have busy lives; their attention is distracted everywhere. So this is something that you don't have to do every day. You use it as you need it.
Right. So it's not literally, but it's not controlling you. You decide when you want to tap into it and have that companion to give you that feedback.
Exactly
as
right.
your choice.
And we're finding that younger people are really devouring it, because you forget that people our age. See the way I said our age, even though I'm older than you. People our age, you do have a lifetime of experience, which doesn't mean you're necessarily an expert on life, but you have reference points. Whereas young people, it's so tough for them nowadays that that practical support is proving to be really valuable in terms of managing their stress and feeling stronger.
This is clearly a passion project for you, Peter, based on where your purpose, but creating something that can support the mental health of everyone, but especially young people who are generally in a more vulnerable position, just sounds like a wonderful thing. So look, Peter, it's been amazing talking to you, catching up again after all these years and hearing, your story. And I really thank you for being so candid and honest. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to your story. So thank you so much for joining the Mojo podcast today, Peter.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's been enjoyable and quite therapeutic as well. Great.
Massive thanks to Peter for coming on and getting really vulnerable and honest in what he shared with me. That takes real strength, not the false strength he once found useful in his get over it and get on with it days of high stress. Now, I've got a long list of takeouts from this one as ever, but let me maybe pick out my top noticings. I found it fascinating that on reflection, Peter realises that journaling of a sort had always been his method of coping with stress, and he'd simply taken it on a step or two as a precursor to inventing Beam. It's amazing the resources we have that sometimes we forget about. And what is it that you can rediscover from your toolkit that can help you today? And of course, as a meditator, I'm delighted, but not at all surprised that Vedic meditation helped Peter find that calm and clarity that he speaks about. But despite each of us having the same teacher, we had no idea that we were both devotees. And it's not like we wear a t-shirt or anything. If you're interested in meditation, do check out episode 3 of this series, my conversation with the brilliant Gillian Lavender of the London Meditation Centre. Gillian really breaks down what meditation is and the benefits of it. And I love that people around Peter began to notice the shifts in him as much as he did, and they let him know. So is there someone in your life you can give some support to right now by simply saying, hey, you've changed and I like it? So thanks again, Peter. Lots of info in the show notes about Beam and how you can sign up. It's free and super useful. And another thing that's free, a 30-minute discovery call with me about coaching and how it can help with stress and lifestyle shifts that you might want to make, about increased awareness, clarity, and finding a high level of performance. No matter what your business, I do specialise in the creative media and tech industries, but not exclusively. If this conversation has piqued your interest in coaching, drop me an email or do get in touch via the Mojo Development website. All the details in the show notes. Okay, do join me again in 2 weeks for another life-affirming conversation. And until then, I hope your mojo continues to flow.